Hello and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We're your hosts, Tori.
And Holland.
Two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we are reviewing Newsies and we'll be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly as always. There are spoilers ahead. Cut to the intro. Alright, welcome to the Lion's Den. For our new listeners, we break down the scoring system by category as we go, but full breakdowns, as always, available on our website. So let's get started. Today I chose Newsies.
The Broadway,
not Newsies,
the film.
Not the film.
Yep.
To be clear, yes. This is familiar to both of us. So this is a Broadway show from 2012. It officially opened on Broadway on March 29th, 2012. The music was written by Alan Menken of Disney fame. If you're any sort of a Disney fan, you know that name. Lyrics were written by Jack Feldman, and it was based on the 1992 film by Bob Zudiker and Nani White. The Broadway production, I thought this was a cool fact. The Broadway production cost about $5 million to stage. Newsies recouped its initial investment of $5 million in only 7 months, becoming the fastest of any Disney musical on Broadway to turn a profit.
Wow.
Yep. And then there was a limited edition movie theater release in February 2017, and it was made available on Netflix in September of 2017. It's now available on Disney Plus to watch. The original Broadway cast stars Jeremy Jordan, John Dossett, Cara Lindsay, Ben Fankhauser, Capathia Jenkins, Andrew Keenan Bolger, Louis Grosso, and Matthew Schechter. At the 2012 Tonys, Newsies was nominated for 8 categories, and they won 2. They won Best Choreography and Best Original Score. And from Broadway.com, I didn't know that was a thing, but I should have figured. But from Broadway.com, the synopsis is, based on the real-life newsboys strike of 1899, this Disney musical tells the story of Jack Kelly, a rebellious newsboy who dreams of life as an artist away from the big city. After publishing giant Joseph Pulitzer raises newspaper prices at the newsboys' expense, Kelly and his fellow newsies take action. With help from the beautiful female reporter Catherine Plummer, all of New York City soon recognizes the power of the little man. So, that being said, we're ready to dive in.
Also, I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a new dog who is in the room while we're recording, so if you hear her panting or feet clicking on the floor, sorry, but it's just the realities of our recording situation right now. Okay, so for theater, first category is plot and story delivery, and for musicals we include song numbers in this category because they are delivering the songs. We do not, or at least I don't particularly consider vocal ability in this category. So not the talent of the cast, but just the numbers, the musical numbers themselves, and how they contribute to the plot. So total possible score for this category is 2 points, and I gave this 1.5 points out of 2. So overall, I think this is just the concept of this story of Newsies is such a good story. It's kind of this untold story of the newsboy strike of 1899, which had much greater impact on societal standards for child labor than, we really understand and give credit to. I think in general, some notes I have, the opening of the show, I think is really good. It goes from Santa Fe and then moves into the song Carrying the Banner, which really establishes kind of the individual motive of Jack Kelly as the story's protagonist, and then his relationship with Crutchy in that first opening number, and then it transitions into the newsboys as a whole. So it kind of establishes this micro story of Jack Kelly, and then also this macro story of the newsboys as a whole, which I think is a really interesting story. It's not only following Jack and his personal dreams and goals, but it's also showing this environment that he lives in with the Newsies as a whole. It's just a good opening to the story. It really establishes really quickly kind of the workings of this rough life of these children newsboys early, so that we can really root for them and want to see them succeed. I think it's a good story development to introduce Davy and his brother Les early. That kind of focuses the story into, or I should say, it gives the audience the ability to jump into the middle of a story, and yet they still get things explained to them. So things like the way that the prices of the newspaper are, and the structure behind the fact that the newspaper boys have to pay for their papers up front, and then whatever they don't sell, they have to eat the cost. You know, that's kind of established lyrically in the song, but then it's reiterated with Davy and Les coming onto the scene and not understanding fully how this kind of working relationship between the newspaper boys and the newspaper entity kind of structure. It explains a lot by having these characters kind of come into play early on. And then it also gives the Davy and Les as kind of structurally of the plot, it kind of gives this reason for the status quo to kind of be upset. So the fact that, you know, the trolley workers are having a strike is kind of underlying background. And then Davy and Les's father was laid off because he got injured, you know, and he didn't have a union to kind of protect him. And then that all kind of provides this backing for the newspaper boys kind of forming their own union. So I think overall, just that delivery, it's really gradual, but it's really easy to follow. And then just that's kind of just the example that I wanted to kind of give as a way that this plot just slowly unfolds and gives you a lot of information and a lot of historical context and structure, but it's really easy to digest. And then in all of that, the musical numbers also move that kind of story and give that background info, and it's really fun to watch and to follow. Along those same lines, the source of conflict, you have this kind of micro relationship between the newspaper boys and the Mr. Wiesel that they call Weasel, and then the bigger picture between the Newsies as a whole entity and versus Pulitzer, who's kind of the runner of the newspaper. And so you have this like external conflict, and then you also have this internal conflict. So like Santa Fe kind of gives you initially the internal conflict, and then also the refuge is kind of that external conflict for Jack as a very small level, and then the larger level of conflict. So it's very layered. Like the structure and the conflict and the motives of the characters are really layered. I think the stakes in the story, as the newspaper boys decide to go on a strike, the prices are changed in newspapers. You see this very realistic motive with Pulitzer as the villain. He's a very believable villain, and you see his reasoning for increasing newspaper price because he's a businessman. And then you see the stakes of that, how it affects these boys, and technically it's a 10-cent price increase, which in this modern day doesn't seem like a lot, but I think the story is really well established. Like they have one of the newspaper boys say that, they can eat 2 days on a dime. So here it is, like 2 days wages or 2 days living expenses is how much the price increase is affecting these kids. And then as the story progresses, you meet, Catherine Plummer / Pulitzer, and the song Watch What Happens shows this impact of this whole situation on a much bigger level, how it's impacting more than just these few kids that we see. It's impacting kind of the standard for working and living, and what you can and can't versus what you should and shouldn't do with employees, especially when they're kids. The musical numbers in this are just phenomenal, I think. Just, they're so well done. It's Alan Menken wrote the music. He does not disappoint.
Exactly. I was like, if you know Alan Menken, then you know that you're going to get a good score here.
So the songs that I particularly just find really invigorating is there's quite a few of these songs where the Newsboys kind of just band together, and they're kind of coming together and working together against their conflict. The World Will Know, Seize the Day, and Once and For All. They're spaced really nicely throughout the show, so you kind of get these moments of conflict, and then we're going to band together and come up with a plan. New conflict presents itself. They band together, come up with a plan. So it's kind of this back and forth of it's kind of climbing a ladder, if you will, and for every like 2 steps forward, there's a setback. And so that kind of gives you this dynamic feeling while you're watching the show. Some other notes I have, I think it has a great sense of humor. There's a lot of physical humor in this show, especially with the actors, their physicality, their presentation. It's a lot of humor that's more visual versus dialogue, although the dialogue is pretty humorous. One thing I really like about the show, and I think is becoming less and less common in modern musicals, is there's a really good balance between musical numbers and then spoken dialogue. So many musicals nowadays, Hamilton, for example, a lot of musicals lean more towards kind of that sung through musical structure. So it's just song after song after song after song. There's little to no spoken dialogue. If there is, it doesn't really deliver the plot or give you any insight. The musical numbers are used to really tell the whole story. But I like getting a break personally. And I think that this show really balances those two aspects of it. Okay, so I do have, why I didn't give it full points though, I do have a couple negatives. One kind of like plot hole I couldn't figure out was when Crutchy writes the letter from the refuge and Jack gets it. How in the world did he get mail? He does not have an address. How did he get a letter sent to him?
I think Davy says that to him when he comes to see him at Miss Meta's theater, and he says that one of the Newsies got the letter to Davy. Like they came by. Well, I guess one of the Newsies came by the refuge and must have got it from the window.
No, because Jack says that he says he got the letter.
I don't know. Then I don't know.
It's not explained, and it's really not important. And I didn't take off any points for it, but I just thought it was weird because it's like here we watch this guy living on a scaffolding of a rooftop and he somehow can get mail. I mean, that's a pretty reliable postal service. But a couple negatives I did have, just in general is, and this is probably going to get a little bit of hate, but the song That's Rich, I really don't like. I think it's kind of dumb and pointless. I mean, it's Meta is an important character and she serves the plot throughout the thing, but I just feel like that song is just kind of
Did you know pointless. That song was added?
It feels like it was.
Yeah, that and a couple songs were added to the Broadway show. And I think That's Rich was one of them. Yeah,
it feels like it's just thrown in there and added to have another song that a female character sings. The other thing, when you're watching and to be fair, I don't think we prefaced anything, but Tori and I watched the pro shot version of this, which is the one that premiered in theaters, and is available now on Disney Plus at the time of us kind of recording this. But because it's the pro shot and it's not a live presentation and there is no intermission, the show basically goes from Seize the Day, and then the next musical number is King of New York. Mm-hmm. And I feel like without a real intermission, there's two really big dance numbers back to back, which feels a bit... It feels a bit overdone, or not really overdone, but it just feels like unbalanced that you have your two biggest musical numbers just immediately back to back to each other at the end of Act 1 and then immediately opening Act 2. So for storytelling purposes, when you're watching the pro shot, it feels a little like we just watched one big dance number and now we're watching another really big dance number. The other thing strictly for plot, is in this show, Jack Kelly is our main character and he's kind of leading the charge of the Newsies. And we watch him quit twice. So he quits the first time when they all get beat up at the strike. And then he basically sells out, quote unquote, with Pulitzer's deal and quits a second time. And I just feel like for the purpose of the plot, it almost feels like we could have balanced this conflict between different characters instead of having Jack give up twice. Again, it's not really a big issue, I don't think. And when you're watching it as an audience member, it doesn't really feel negative when you're watching it. And I didn't really pick up on it the first couple times I've watched it. But in kind of analyzing it critically, it's like our main protagonist, who we're supposed to be like rooting behind, he gave up twice. Like something bad happened, he quits. Something bad happens again, he quits again. It just seems kind of, you know, I guess in a way it's realistic, but it seems kind of lackluster that your main protagonist that you're cheering for the whole way is kind of a quitter twice. Granted, realistically, it would be completely understandable, but, you know, this isn't real life, it's a musical. The other thing, I think the scene after Jack quits the second time and he's up on the rooftop, the kiss between him and Catherine is just like super corny. It's really tropey at that point. And then the song that follows it, Something to Believe In, just feels kind of sappy in a way. It's like, here we are talking about the Newsboys strike and how we're going to have a crusade and expose the refuge and all this like really important plot moving stuff. And then, oh, by the way, let's sing about possible romantic options in the future. Like it just seems it just falls kind of flat. It doesn't really, and I get that, you know, that you have this kind of chemistry between the two characters, you know, which is fine, but I just think for the purpose of the plot, it's just, I'm not a big fan. So for that reason, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2, but I still think overall it's just done really well.
Okay. So for me, in plot and story delivery, I also gave it 1.5 points out of 2. I think that one thing that Newsies does really, really well is pacing the overall delivery of the story. We get a nice setup in the Santa Fe prologue for the desires and motivations of our main character, Jack. And then kind of like you mentioned before, then as we move on, it's almost like we zoom out just a little bit in those first few scenes. It's like we zoom out a little more, and then we zoom out a little bit more, and then we zoom out a little bit more, but until we finally get this understanding of like, what is the problem? How is it affecting our characters, and what is a realistic expectation for how this is going to go? I think if they were to start big and zoom in, it would not have the same effect as it does in the show. I really like that they start us zoomed quite in and then zoom us out backwards. I think that because of that, you have this nice revelation, I guess, of the conflict because it's not fully revealed in the beginning, and you don't understand the scope of the problem until you've zoomed out a bit. And kind of like you said, you touched on this a bit, but one thing I really appreciate about how this story is delivered is that you get the opportunity to see how the conflict affects every single character, and how the relationships between the characters also further that conflict or resolution. I think if you had just Jack, Kelly, and Catherine, it would not have the same story. You wouldn't have the same story. If it was just a bunch of Newsies, you know, without any sort of distinctions in like leadership or hierarchy, I guess for lack of a better term, it also wouldn't have the same effect. And I think that having these like newcomers, these sort of outsiders that we get at the very beginning, Davy and Les, we get to see how this whole situation affects not just the Newsies that we've seen in carrying the banner, but now these new kids on the street, and their reasonings for being Newsies is completely different than everybody else's, but the goal is the same, and that's to feed each other. And so I think that because of that, we do get that really nice layering in just as we get everything explained to us, and then as we find a way to fix everything that's broken. I don't think there's ever any moment in the show where I feel as though we're not getting anything done with the exception of one scene, which I'll talk about later. I think that each scene does serve the purpose it should serve. There's no real throwaway scenes with one exception. I'll talk about that in a minute. I think that there is a lot to be said for the musical numbers and the emotions that they invoke when you watch/listen to them. I think they all invoke the proper emotion that you would want your audience to have at that time. For example, like The World Will Know, you kind of start to see the frustrations building, and you start to feel the, I guess, tension, I guess, in your own body is the best way I can describe it. If you're truly paying attention to the story, at least, you should be feeling the tension rising in your body at this point as you feel the tension of the conflict start to come kind of to a point. And so it's almost like a resolving of this is a problem, acknowledging that this is a problem and we should do something to fix it. And then it all sort of comes to that T in Seize the Day. I get goosebumps almost every time I listen to that song. And I think it's just because you truly are, by the time you get to Seize the Day, you're truly rooting for all of these newsboys and you're wanting to see a positive change for them in their life. You want them to be treated fairly, and you want, you just want the conflict between what feels like the little guys and the big guys to come out where there's, equal footing on both sides. So because of that, I think when you're feeling all the emotions that they kind of guide you into through the show, and that's mostly through the musical numbers, I think it's all good to sort of accept those emotions as they come, because they really do, I think, as an audience member, help you to truly invest yourself in the story. I think any piece of media that can get you invested in it is really what you want, because if you're invested in something, then you care about how it goes. And so that, I think that applies to any piece of media, and with Newsies, I think that's a really good example of them doing wonderful things without being obvious that they really are investing you into the story. I think that the one scene that I could do without is the same scene that you could do without, and it's Something to Believe In, and it's because it feels almost wrong to be making googly eyes at each other while literally your friends are hiding, haven't been beat up, everything's awful and terrible, and so you're just gonna have this weird date up on the rooftop. It just feels almost disrespectful in a way, and I'm sure a lot of Newsies fans are gonna disagree with me, but I also think the song as a whole is kind of boring and redundant when you compare it to everything else in the show. I think the harmonies are great, and this is in no way a slight to the talent of Jeremy Jordan and Kara Lindsay, because I think they're incredible, and I'll talk about them more later on. So it's nothing against them. It's just where the song is placed and how the song is delivered doesn't do the same thing for me as every other scene in every other musical number. So when I'm like, all right, this is the time I'm going to get up and go to the bathroom for these 4 minutes, that's disappointing, So that happens. But I think as we get toward the end of the show, so we're about halfway through Act 2 at this point, I think all of the steps that you start to see coming into place, all of the things that felt so hopeless that are kind of sliding into place, is a very satisfying way to wrap up a show, where the ending doesn't feel rushed, because things are starting to go well before you get to the end that lead you into the end, without it being so good, things are going well, but without being so nicely placed that now you have no expectation that anything could go wrong again. There's still a bit of tension. It's not like, oh, okay, everything's going good, so we're good. I know how this is going to turn out. I just think that there's a nice pacing to the wrap up, I guess I would call, of the show, and conclusion. Not to mention the fact that there's something very satisfying about knowing that the Newsies that we come to know very well eventually convince all of the Newsies of New York to come together. And when you see the boroughs gather, like, that's one of my favorite parts of the whole show. I remember when me and Holland went to go see it in the theater, and the Brooklyn boys showed up, and I almost stood up and cheered because I was so excited. And then I was like, oh wait, I'm in a movie theater and this is not live. But it was just like, it's just what I mean about like everything sort of fitting into place in a very satisfying way. And it makes me feel almost a weird sense of accomplishment seeing how much they are accomplishing. I mean, I know I'm not doing any of that work, but it still feels as though I'm getting to be a part of it in a way. I can only imagine that feeling would be heightened seeing it live in person, which I have never had the chance to do, but because it's not on Broadway no more. But you know, I just imagine that, you know, as much as I feel these things watching the recorded pro shot version of it on Disney Plus, that it would be even more so if I were to get the opportunity to see it in person. So that's why I gave it 1.5 out of 2 points. And that half point was literally taken away because of something to believe in. So,
yeah. All right. Next category is characters. So total possible score of 3. I gave this category 2.5 points out of 3. I think the characters in this, especially the lead cast, the characters are just so well done. And one thing I think that Newsies does that is so difficult in any medium is it has a large number of minor characters, and they all feel fleshed out, rounded out, and integral to the plot. There are, you know, like, for example, Pulitzer is kind of your main villain, but there's also Snyder and Weasel and the Delanceys. And, you know, there's so many other small villains, but they all feel important to the plot. It's not like you have these random villains that nobody sees the significance of. They all serve a purpose in the plot, and they all feel like real people and their actions seem very believable and realistic. Overall, I think all of the characters, their actions seem very believable and realistic. I think that the casting also is just absolutely perfect. Now, granted, this is the pro shot version, and Tori and I actually have not seen this on Broadway. This is our only exposure to this medium, and we've not watched the original film either. So
I have, but it's been a very long time, and I don't remember much about it,
Gotcha.
other than Christian Bale being in it.
Yeah, I have not seen it at all, and I really don't have any desire to, because I just feel like I've heard there's a lot of differences, but the casting in this pro shot version is just done so well, and so I would have the exact same expectations with the original Broadway cast and then subsequent live Broadway casts or touring productions, whoever would be playing those roles. I would really expect the casting to be the same. Just very, very well done. I think in general for Jack as a character, I really like that he's not this clean, squeaky clean kind of protagonist. He's really rough around the edges. He's got this kind of cocky attitude, but then he really has a lot of genuine ambition. I think that the musical numbers that kind of reflect his internal monologue do a great job at highlighting kind of how he has these aspirations for something better than what he has. And then he also has this really strong protective instinct towards the other Newsies and has this really strong sense of justice and his desire for people to be fair and to play by the right rules and to do things the right way. The fact that he's really a clear leader even from the beginning of the very first number, carrying the banner, the very first group number, I guess you could call it. And then he is very much the spokesman of the Newsies, especially when they're forming a union and going to talk to Pulitzer and things like that. But then he gives Davy this intellectual credit for this plan. So he really develops and grows as a character. Like I kind of bashed him a little bit for quitting twice, but he really comes back from that and rebounds and springs back. And then he has that growth as a character, and then he really fulfills the line where the guy in charge doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room. He just has to know what the best idea is.
Which he regurgitates from Catherine.
Right. So that kind of concept that's said in the show, he really embodies that as a character. He progresses and embodies that as a character. So he's a really admirable protagonist to root for, but he still feels like a human being. He doesn't feel like this archetype of a hero. He just feels like this kind of cocky kid who's just trying to survive, who finds himself becoming this hero as he progresses throughout the show. Catherine, I think, is one of the best female characters in, I would say in theater, but that's a really big statement, so I feel like I can't say that specifically, especially because
I would agree with that statement.
Yeah, especially because my exposure to theater is pretty limited, but she's such a great female protagonist. I think that the thing that makes her such a good female protagonist is that she actually has impact in the story. She's not a romantic lead. She's an actual character who makes a big difference in the plot. And kind of the themes in Newsies, which I didn't really talk about in talking about the plot, but a lot of the message in Newsies is that the press really does have impact. You know, if you're not published in the paper, it never happened. And so she's so crucial to the plot because she's willing to give these kids who are trying to make a difference, give them basically airtime and give them, you know, published exposure. So, which is crucial to the plot. It's kind of one of the most important things to happen in the story. And so in addition to her, you know, wanting to be a reporter and to get out of the entertainment section, it's also really admirable in the musical number, Watch What Happens. You see, she just has such a bigger perspective that this is so much more than increasing the price of newspapers by 10 cents. It has a bigger impact on really society as a whole, and you know, the impact is so much bigger than even just the Newsies themselves. So that musical number is fantastic to begin with, but it just gives you a lot of really admirable insight to her as a character. In speaking of Jack and Catherine, I do like how they're both introduced and their relationship with each other. They have pretty good chemistry just straight off the bat, and their relationship isn't this puppy love. They're intellectual equals, and they have good chemistry together. They're kind of back and forth, you know, it's a little antagonistic, but then they really both want to make a difference and impact the same cause. And so that's another reason I feel like that Something to Believe In musical number, it's even unnecessary, because you buy, as you're watching these characters grow, you buy a romantic interest throughout the show, even if you took that musical number completely out of it. So, I mean, that was one reason that I didn't give this a full 3 points, because I think that, like, it kind of falls into the plot, but it kind of also falls into the character, because that song is kind of an internal dialogue, or it's kind of an internal monologue / dialogue between the two characters. It kind of reveals who they are. I think that Davy and Les are a great contrast. Davy's a great foil to Jack. He has this different perspective and brings different views to the table, and yet they both work towards this common goal. And so I feel like they both make up for each other's deficits, and they both kind of lead the Newsboys strike in their own way. And it's really good to watch the two of them work together and come up with better ideas. And especially in the sense where Davy is kind of talking to Jack about how, yeah, all the newspaper boys are out there selling papers as if the strike never happened, which is a very realistic plot device to happen, a very realistic thing that would occur, because you have to put food on the table. And then Davy's come back to that and explaining how, you know what, yeah, because we have to feed, you know, our families, but that doesn't mean that what we did had no impact. And so bringing these alternative perspectives to Jack. He not only moves the plot forward, but you find a lot of admirable qualities in him, that he's actually, intellectually just really intelligent, and then he also just has a completely different perspective. He has a family. He knows what that's like. He understands kind of these bigger, I guess, more educated concepts. And so he's a great kind of yin to Jack's yang, if you will. Pulitzer as a villain, I've kind of already touched on this a little bit. I really like the fact that he's just a very realistic villain. You don't like him, but at the same time, especially as an adult, I completely understand where he's coming from. He's trying to run a business. He's trying to make money. It really is about the bottom line, which, love it or hate it, you got to pay to keep the lights on, in running a business. So it's not necessarily, they didn't take the easiest path and just make him this greedy, money hungry, Lex Luthor, mustache twirling villain. He really has a perspective of a businessman in the early 1900s who's trying to, one, impact the world that he has. He talks about, wanting to use the press to prevent Governor Roosevelt from being elected, which is very realistic. That's still happening today with media. It's trying to influence the political landscape, and then also just him trying to run a business and sell newspapers and when wartime happens, sell a lot of papers. And when wartime's over, you can't sell any newspapers because there's nothing happening that's really interesting. It's just very believable as a villain, but then you still just can't stand him because it's like, how could you pick on these little kids that are trying to sell newspapers and living on the streets? Like, how could you take advantage of people? So it still gives you, as the viewer, this kind of moral dislike of him because you don't agree with his kind of morals and values, but it's still completely believable as just a man who's trying to run a business. And then I really like the fact that he makes a deal with Jack. He appeals to Jack's kind of morality and his protectiveness against these Newsies, and that's the way that Pulitzer tries to take advantage of who Jack is as a character to get him to kind of kowtow to what he wants. So he sees that Jack is leading these kids and is like, well, if you really want to take care of them and you really want to protect them, you should take my deal. Instead of just being like, I'm going to beat you into the ground.
I'm going to punch you in the face.
No. Instead of, which did happen, the cops were called and all these people, busting up the trolley workers, the same people that busted them up trying to stop these strikes from happening. He doesn't approach it from that method. He approaches it from more of this kind of underhanded method, which is just, I think it's just done really well. All of the minor characters, the Brooklyn Boys, Miss Meadowlarkin, even, Weasel and the Delanceys, and then the kind of the, I guess, quote unquote, minor Newsies characters, they're all just really great. I think they flesh out the rest of the story really well. It's a huge cast. The ensemble's huge in this show. And yet all of the Newsies have, their own personalities, and they are easily identified amongst that ensemble, which I think is just done really well. A couple reasons I couldn't give this full points. I think Les as a character in this pro shot especially is just a little over the top. It's typical, I think, in film and TV and theater mediums, that if you're going to have a child actor, there's always a chance that they're just going to act like a child actor and not act like a child. And I think that this particular portrayal of Les is so much like a child actor. I personally find it annoying. Like, his facial expressions are just over exaggerated, and don't come at me and tell me that, well, it's theater, everything's more over the top in theater because you're acting to the back of the house. Like, I know that, but then nobody else in that show is doing that. Just this one little kid.
If you compare, like, Les to Davy.
Exactly.
There's a pretty big
There's a
difference.
huge difference.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. And it's no discredit to the actor. He's doing a great job for, I'm sure, what he was directed and told to do. I just think as a character, Les is just a little over the top in general. Just to the point where, to me, it's distracting. The other thing, and this is probably going to also get a lot of hate, is I have a problem with Crutchy as a character. He's like the token cripple in this show. Like, he doesn't do anything except get captured and write a sad letter. Like, that's it. I mean, he has no personality. He sings in the song that you have to have personality to sell papers. Well, why doesn't he have one? Why is he the only character that doesn't have a personality, except the fact that he walks around with a crutch? His name is Crutchy. Like, they couldn't have tried any harder to make his only identifying factor be that he is a newspaper boy who's a cripple and walks around with a crutch. I mean, just come on. Like, really? It's at this point, when was this released? 2017? Like, it's 2017. Can we not come up with a better character than Crutchy? And then it's like this one flat character is the one that gets this overly emotional letter, and he's the one that we're supposed to believe has such a close bond with Jack that Jack's gonna take him to Santa Fe with him. Well, why don't we see any of that in the rest of the show? It's like we have this one line where it's like, I'll take you to Santa Fe with me, woohoo, and then nothing. No other relationship, nothing else. There's no bonding. We don't see any depth in their relationship with each other. Like, Jack has a better relationship with the kid that has the cigar than he does them with Crutchy, who's supposed to be like his best friend and gets the over-emotional letter. Like, I'm sorry. I'm going to get a lot of hate for that because I know Crutchy's like a fan favorite character.
We're going to get canceled.
And what is it? Andrew Keegan-Bolger that plays him is a huge Broadway star and has a lot of fandom around him.
He's also the original Crutchy, like before it was even on Broadway, when it was in workshops.
Yeah,
it was Crutchy.
And I get it. He does a great job, but it's like, could we not have written him with a little more depth?
That's not Andrew's fault.
No, it's not at all. So. And,
sorry, man.
You got the token cripple character. It's just, but you do a great job with what you have, but it's not great. I'm just not a fan. So for that reason, 2.5 points out of 3. But otherwise, I would say overall, great character work in this show, but not quite perfect.
Okay. For me, I gave it 3 out of 3 points for characters. I have no issue with Crutchy. Do I think he's the most interesting character? No, but I don't have any issues with him. I also don't have any issues with Les. I actually think Les is really funny. Like, he talks about his date with Sally. She's a plum, and I just think it's so funny.
I think it's terrible.
I think it's just so funny. Anyway, but I kind of want to touch on what you said. One of your first notes about characters was how this is a very, very large cast, and I think in some shows or productions that could be a downfall. However, I believe that the large ensemble and smaller cast of smaller characters that we get a lot of is a good thing because it helps sell the believability that New York was a bustling place even in 1899. And so knowing that you have this widespread of Newsies that's covering all of New York City, and then you have these 5 boroughs that have their own sets of Newsies, it really does kind of help you believe and buy that that we're in the time period and location that this is all set in. So I think it helps. It's almost a story device, but it is, I think something to be commended, that you have all of these Newsies, and like you said, they're all very distinct. And while some of them may not have any speaking lines, you still come to appreciate every single one of them, and you believe that they're working toward the goal, even if we never know some of their names. Like, we don't know all of the Newsies' names, but we see them, in every ensemble scene, and we're like, okay, yeah, go, dude, go, or whatever. But with our main cast, perfect casting. I just have to echo that. Jeremy Jordan is incredible as Jack Kelly. I don't know if I could watch another person play Jack Kelly. I don't think I could. I think I would compare all the time. And I don't know. Cara Lindsay, I love Cara Lindsay. Let me talk about Cara Lindsay for a second.
Tell us about her.
So when I went to Disney World with Holland and her family, it was during the Epcot Art Festival. It was like January or something. And they would have special guests come and sing like Disney hits or Broadway Disney hits in the American Pavilion in Epcot each night. And the day we were in Epcot, who was singing but Cara Lindsay? I lost my mind. I got to see Cara Lindsay live singing songs from Newsies and other shows. But Newsies, and it was one of the best nights of my life. I love Cara Lindsay, and I really, really respect her and look up to her. She makes me want to do more theater. But she brings so much life to Catherine. And she brings so much likability to Catherine without making her seem like a perfect picturesque character. She still has flaws as a character, but Cara Lindsay really just brings so much life to Catherine and really does make her, in my opinion, one of the best female characters in theater that I've come across. But also, I think Ben Fankhauser as Davy is incredible. And like you said, a perfect foil to Jack. I feel like Jack and Davy are me and you a little bit. And I see a lot of like their characteristics, I think, reflected in us, especially in the midst of like a problem we're trying to solve or a conflict between us.
So we should do that for our next Halloween costume.
Yeah, let's be Jack and Davy for Halloween next year. But all of that to say, these actors, our main cast and our ensemble, they do such a wonderful job at making you believe from the moment the show starts to the moment the show ends that the chemistry and relationships between everybody is genuine and realistic. And there's no point where I find myself like kind of being like, I don't think they really believe what they're saying to each other. I believe that they're saying these things to each other and they mean them. And I get lost sometimes in that like line blur that these are not real people, these characters, that they're emulating real people from real events. But, Jack Kelly is not a real person I'm watching, but Jeremy Jordan sure is making him feel like that. And just seeing the camaraderie, the humor between, everybody in the ensemble, it's just absolutely fantastic. I like seeing the different humor in the different Newsies too. And there's a lot of really, really wonderful moments. Everybody nails the accents, the mannerisms from the time without feeling like carbon copy and paste versions of each other. It's like everybody is still themselves, but there's a nice cohesion to the whole company. The voices. I want to talk real quick just about the talent from everybody. This show has some of the most incredible high harmonies that I've ever heard from boys ensembles. Like some of these notes, I don't even know if I could hit. And these men are dancing and then hitting these notes. And I'm like blown away. The harmonies are just so good. And song I really want to highlight in regards to just the talent of the harmony of the actors is the Watch What Happens reprise, which is Jack, Davy, Les, and Catherine. And they have these beautiful 4-part harmonies that are just absolutely wonderful. And it just makes you happy to listen to. And it's just hearing the raw talent of their vocals is just something to be commended. I like Miss Meta. I think she is slightly flat, but I think the role that Miss Meta has in this show is the safe adult for these boys. And she plays that perfectly. And she is reliable. She is kind. She does like favors for these boys in ways that are beneficial to them. She's also a nice voice of wisdom and reason, especially for Jack. She gives them a safe place to come to, that sort of thing. I just wish that maybe she wasn't so flat as far as like personality goes. Like, we understand who she is pretty early on, but we don't get a lot of opportunities to see a lot of facets of her. And I kind of wish that we had. And that's kind of how I feel about Pulitzer too, kind of the other adult, like main adult in this show. I think Pulitzer is a great villain. He's very understandable, like you said. I get where he's coming from. I understand his motivations and his goals. I understand why he's frustrated and what he's trying to do. However, I think that he does not have any opportunities to show any side of him other than the hard-nosed businessman. And so the one relationship that I feel doesn't feel very realistic is his relationship with Catherine, because he never feels like a dad at any point in the show, in my opinion. He just feels like a businessman.
Well, and to be fair, I think that in a sense, the historical timing, dads weren't the same kind of dads that they are today.
True.
So for a man of his esteem, he probably didn't have a relationship with any of his kids, let alone
fair.
his daughter. Another thing with Meta Larkin, I think that's important to note is, and because I caught this on this watch through when prepping for this episode, she is the reason that they're able to get the governor Roosevelt involved at the end of the film.
Correct. Yeah.
Not film, but the play. So I think she's used a lot more as a plot device and a plot.
Yeah, she moves forward the resolution.
Yeah.
And I think that that's good and necessary, but I wish that we had been given an opportunity for both Miss Meta and Pulitzer to see them more as people and not for the specific role.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we get a lot of opportunities with Jack, with Catherine, with Davy, with some of the other Newsies. We get to see kind of their highs and their lows. We get to see, kind of the appearance that they give to the city, and also kind of like their worries and burdens. We get opportunities for that a lot in the show, and we don't with either of the main adult characters. So just something that I felt was slightly lacking, but I didn't take any points off for it. The only other note that I have for characters is I don't understand why, but why is Spot Conlon so popular? Like, he's the leader of the Brooklyn Boys. When the guy who I guess originated him came back for the 2017 filming, like, he gets this crazy wild applause. I poked around on Tumblr for Newsies memes, and there's so many Spot Conlon memes, and I don't know if I fully understand. I mean, I like Spot Conlon, and I think it's because in the show everybody seems to be afraid of him, and yet he's this like tiny little burly man. So it's like he doesn't really like fit the mental image that you would think of everybody being like intimidated. But anyway, I don't know. Something about Spot Conlon everybody loves. So
I think it's just that typical fandom of the character that very little about, just tends to
it's
get
like
the most
elusivity or whatever is just like appealing.
Right. I think it's another reason why Crutchy has such a big fandom is because you just don't know a lot about him. So, and I think fandoms in general, they pick the like least they pick minor characters to kind of attach to, and I think it's probably because you can use your imagination on those characters.
You can create your own headcanons about these
right,
people. Yeah.
Right.
That's fair. So yeah, for me, 3 out of 3 points for characters.
Yeah. All right, so the next category is aesthetics, which we don't have written on our sheet, but I feel like for musicals moving forward, we should discuss vocal ability in this category.
Okay, instead of in characters?
Yeah, because in general, with movies and theater, it's going to fall into the score and the sound and the score, and it's kind of the sound aspect of it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so for aesthetics, out of possible 2 points, I gave this 2 out of 2 points. Absolutely phenomenal. I think the choreography and the dance numbers alone could merit 2 points. for this show. It's just absolutely incredible. The dancing ability of the ensemble is just
incredible.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's so there's a lot of traditional aspects of dance. I've kind of mentioned in previous episodes, like if you want a big tap dance number, you won't always get that in a musical. This musical has a nice big tap dance number for you. The choreography has that traditional aspect of dance. There's a lot of ballet moves in it. I'm not a dance expert, so I'm not even going to try and get into kind of the technical aspects of the choreography or elaborate on it, but it looks so difficult. The number of turns that they're doing, it's crazy how difficult I'm sure this choreography is. But the other thing that I think makes the dance numbers and the dancing choreography in this show so good is it's so athletic. They really capitalize on the athletic ability of their male cast and the gymnast type moves that they do. It's really, really capitalizing on the fact that the ensemble is an all-male ensemble. It's just done really, really well. And I think one thing about this show that's very, well, it isn't necessarily unique to theater, but the ensemble absolutely outshines the male cast. I don't think Jack Kelly really dances at all in this show.
No, I think he only dances in like 2 numbers, and it's only briefly.
And it's not any of the really technically difficult moves. He just kind of, he does the steps and the blocking and the choreography with the ensemble, but he really doesn't do a lot of those complex moves and turns and spins and things like that. So dancing alone, we could just talk for, a whole episode on just the dancing ability in this show. Some other things, though, that I just really, really enjoy are, and I think should be commended in this show, are the set. That's that 3x3 scaffolding pieces that move throughout the whole show, and then the screens that kind of come down and work as projection backdrops. I've said before that I really don't like the use of screens in theater or the overuse of screens in theater, but this does such a good job. And I think the key difference between this show versus other maybe newer shows or, different productions is that the screens that are used are always used if it shows any kind of lettering or imaging, like when the typewriter's typing, it's all to move forward the story. But then if it's used as a backdrop, it looks like a painted backdrop piece. It's not a photo image or CGI produced image onto this as this screen backdrop. It looks like it was painted. The skyline of New York looks like somebody painted that backdrop. The background of Pulitzer's office, that's projected onto those screens that are kind of pulled down along that scaffolding. And it looks like somebody hand-painted a backdrop of what Pulitzer's office should look like. It's just done so tastefully that it's not distracting for you as a viewer, but then it also looks like it fits the time of 1899 with these kind of hand-painted-esque looking backdrops. I really am a big fan of that. The projection effects, especially, like, for example, with when the number for Santa Fe, the opening number, changes into New York City, that's a projection effect. That's not a hand-painted backdrop that they've changed with stagehands. It's kind of like the dream of Santa Fe ends into this harsh New York City skyline. It's effective storytelling, even if you're not consciously paying attention to it. And then, of course, there's smaller projection effects, like the trolley headline being typed out onto the blackboard looking set piece. And then when the strike appears, when the Newsies strike and the world will know, and then Jack is able to kind of motion like he's underlined the word strike, and that projection effect like that. It's just very effective storytelling without being anything that's really complex or over the top. It's just very simple and very effective. Yeah, one transition, like physical transition with this kind of scaffolding pieces, when it goes from the rally where Jack gets kind of flipped the stack of money and then the Newsies kind of all scatter, that transition between that scene right there into Jack's balcony with the kind of the clotheslines coming into the foreground, and then the ladder with this up into the scaffolding into kind of the mid and background. That transition, I think, is just so beautiful. Like it's not anything that's aesthetically pretty, but it's just so smooth. It's just like we've literally just watched this scene just shift so smoothly and so seamlessly from this rally inside a theater into the streets of New York and into the background, and bringing those clothesline pieces out. Just all of those set pieces are just done really well, and it helps tell the story without it being distracting or looking out of place. The costumes too, I think, are great. I like how they use color palettes with most of the newsboys, especially towards the end of the show. The newsboys are all wearing some form of blue, or blue, gray and brown, but predominantly blue. Jack Kelly's, shirt is blue, like a bright, I wouldn't say bright, but a pretty
saturated blue.
Yeah. And then the Pulitzer and his, office workers, and then, Weasel and the Delanceys all wear that kind of black and gray color palettes. Catherine's costume is great. She kind of stands out.
She's always pretty colorful.
Yeah. And then even towards the end, Miss Meadowlarkin is wearing blue as well, kind of in a visual solidarity with the Newsies. And then with the exception of the Brooklyn Boys, who are all wearing those kind of bright reds as that nice contrast amongst the traditional Manhattan Newsies versus the Brooklyn Newsies. And then I really just wanted to touch a little bit on the kind of the pro shot quality of this. The cinematic quality of the pro shot is just done so well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen the pro shot for this and the pro shot for the musical Hamilton, which we reviewed in a prior episode, and I think this pro shot is better. It's so much better.
I agree.
They get close-ups on the actors' faces, of course, but then there's movement of the camera. There's panning and tracking with the camera to where it really feels cinematic. It captures the story very well, and yet it still gives you those wide shots for the cast, and then the overhead shots for some of the dance numbers. It's just done really, really well cinematically. So I highly recommend watching the pro shot if you were not able to see the Newsies musical live, which I was not, and Tori wasn't either. It really is a great way to watch a live theater production in film form. So I think it really is kind of setting the bar very high for pro shots, and really highlighting the standard for those kinds of access to the theater media. So 2 out of 2. Again, one thing I love in this show, which I wish you could somehow get in live theater, which you can't because it'd be you probably could, but it'd be very difficult. I love that with the curtain call, the actors' names show up. So when they're coming to do their curtain call, you can see
exactly that, whoever that newsie is.
And is played by this actor.
Boom. Yeah.
And I love that. I wish live theater would do that, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a show and I'm thoroughly enjoying the show, and yet I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah.
And granted, you have your playbill and you can look up their names, sure.
But if you've got a huge ensemble like that and you never learn this character's name, it's like...
You'll never know who they were.
Right.
You'll never know who they were unless you see them again in another production, and then you're like, oh yeah, I did see that. I read it in their credits. So I wish that live theater could somehow implement this. Whoever's gonna come up with the way to do that, you better give me a cut, because this was my idea. And but yeah, I really think
deposit it in our Lion and Mouse podcast bank account, please.
Yes, we'll send it to you with our social security numbers, and you can give it to us. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. Please don't
ask us for our social security numbers
or our identity at all, please. So 2 out of 2 for aesthetics. Again, I think the dancing and the choreography alone could carry all of the aesthetics to 2 out of 2, but overall it's just done so well.
Okay, for me, I also gave it 2 out of 2 points for aesthetics. This show shines aesthetically. Choreography, yes, incredibly acrobatic. I would love to measure the air these dudes get. I don't know. And then they turn around and sing. And I'm like, how do you do this?
Yeah.
How? They have stamina for days, apparently. So incredible work. The choreography, I don't want to beat that note too much in the ground because Holland did talk about that a lot, but it is absolutely incredible. The scaffolding, yes. The reason that the scaffolding is supremely impressive is because of how incredibly useful and smooth the transitions are. To compare to a show like Hamilton, Hamilton's set is set and it works so well for its set. However, it's stagnant. You can't really move it, with the exception of the turntable and the floor, which we've talked about. However, in Newsies, every single tower of that scaffolding can be moved and repositioned in whatever way you want. And this tags into my agreeance with how incredibly dynamic the camera work is for the pro shot. There are multiple points in the show. I'll give one scene for an example, where the characters are moving around the scaffolding pieces as the scaffolding pieces are being moved. And if you were sitting in the audience of the theater, you would just see your characters kind of crossing. You wouldn't get to see much of the expression. So the scene where Catherine approaches Jack and is basically like, I'm going to give you the story. Tell me when and where. Jack's like, all right, here's when and where. Be there. You'll have your story. And then there's a little bit of sort of like romantic tension banter that goes on there. And then they start to say goodnight. And as Catherine leaves, she goes around the back and then he follows her and he's like, wait, write it good. We both have a lot riding on you about this. And we get to see, because of the pro shot, that camera moves as they do. So even though they're technically standing behind your set pieces, we still see them as if they were right there. So the pro shot version of this on Disney Plus really is amazing to watch, and I think you get to see a lot of the nuances and expression and like even just like body language that you may miss from the stage because so many pieces are moving during small moments like this. So absolutely incredible. I also think the lighting is really, really good in this show. The lighting highlights areas really well while not being distracting. And that is good theater, just in general. That's kind of a good rule of thumb, is that if your lighting is doing a proper job of setting your tone and also drawing your attention to where it should be, then you're succeeding in lighting. And I think that Newsies is doing that exceptionally well. There is a lot of, I'll use the scene for an example of Crutchy in the refuge. So obviously the implication is that the only light in the refuge is this candle that Crutchy has beside his bed. But in a realistic sense, you can't light your actor with one candle. So they put a very yellowy, orange, muted, almost foggy type light on Crutchy, and it's super effective. It's super effective, but you're not watching it thinking, oh, they're using a very muted orangey light to make it look like. You're not thinking these things consciously, unless you're us, like, and analyzing this on purpose. But like an average viewer is not going to think these things while they're watching, but technically that is what's happening, and that's why it's effective. So there's a lot of examples of that throughout the whole show, of just good lighting choices. Also agree with your point about screen usage. There's two really, really perfect uses of that, and that is in when Jack goes up and he writes, in quotations, strike, but Jeremy Jordan is literally just holding his hand up while the screen writes strike, and then he swoops his hand to kind of finish that moment. It's just a wonderful use of that screen. The other wonderful use is, I think, in Watch What Happens. As Catherine starts writing, you see, it's almost like the bits of her brain being put together into an article on the screen behind her. And it's really effective, I think, to kind of see how her brain is very scattered at the moment, but as the song goes on, it starts to organize itself. And the pieces on the screen start to organize themselves. It's just a really cool parallel with like her thought process at the time. And really my final note is that the score and soundtrack is just wonderful. It's one of those like soundtracks that I never really get bored of. I listen to it a lot in the car, and I literally just started at the top of the show and let it run. And it's just kind of one of those soundtracks that really does a wonderful job of like painting that story, even if you don't get the visuals. Just the emotion in the singing, the music itself, just the use of instrumentation, rhythm, pacing, all of those sorts of things is just really, really wonderful and really is what makes this show good. If the show did not have the soundtrack it did, it wouldn't be, I don't think it would have been a successful show. And so I really, really want to just give another, big round of applause to Alan Menken and what he did for this show in regards to the music, because the music is what brings it to life. And the actors do a great job and everything like that, but without a good soundtrack, they would have had nothing really to work with. So just wonderful music through and through, and just absolutely wonderful vocal ability from everybody who sings on it. So that being said, 2 out of 2 for aesthetics.
Awesome. All right, so next category, as always, is personal taste and preference. Total possible score of 2 points, and I gave this 2 out of 2 points. I thoroughly enjoyed this musical. It's so much fun to watch. Yeah, this is just a musical I just always enjoy when I watch it. Every time I watch it, it's just fun. It's got a great story. The characters are just so likable. It's a good time. Every time I watch it, it's just a good time. I think the pro shot especially is just done so well that it's just so easy to enjoy. It's that same experience as if you're watching a film, but it's so much fun to watch these actors react to a live audience. You can just tell in watching the pro shot version of it that they are feeding off of that energy in the theater. And from what I understand, there was a line, however long, of people just to get tickets to see it, just because it was.
Did you know that they filmed it originally over 3 nights, and because the demand was so great, they added a 4th night where they filmed just to try to get a few more people in that had not had the opportunity. That's how high the demand was.
Yeah, and it shows. I think there's a reason that this show has a fandom and it has so much appeal. It's just, and the other thing is, it's a Broadway show about New York, which, don't get me wrong, we can so overdo New York Broadway shows about New York, but it's just done so well. It's telling a time and a story that's kind of an unsung hero story, and it's just done in such a tasteful way that you can find relevance in today's day and age. And whatever your circumstance, I think everybody can relate to standing up for what you believe in and standing up for what's right, even in the sense of insurmountable odds. And that's just such an appealing story to anybody, but I just find that really fun to watch, and it's something you can really get into, and it's not overly complicated. There's not really a third act breakup, which I like. I like the fact that, we watch him fail twice, and yet his friends and his team are still there to help kind of pick him back up, and they pick up and move on and try again. And it's so enjoyable to watch that environment for your main characters versus the stereotypical rinse and repeat story of the main character makes a mistake and everybody's mad at him and he has to make amends so that he can get back together, and then they come back in and win at the end. I also just think I really like the way that Jack's deal with Pulitzer at the end and the resolution of the plot as a whole is just very believable. It's still realistic. It's not like he took down this giant with, it's kind of a David and Goliath story, and ironically, one of the characters' name is Davy. I think that was probably intentional.
Probably.
But it's kind of this David and Goliath story, but it still has very believable context and very believable resolution. So overall, it's just it's got some great heroes to root for. The characters are just really fun. And I think watching the pro shot just makes it even more enjoyable because you're getting to watch all of the benefits of live theater are just still available to enjoy even in this pro shot version. So 2 out of 2 for me. It's a great show. I just really enjoy it.
I agree. So for me, I also gave it 2 out of 2 points for personal taste and preference. So Newsies is one of those things where just consuming it makes me happy. Like, I just feel happy when I'm watching Newsies. And so I don't mean to sound shallow or vapid, but I don't have like a ton of like reasoning or like argument as to why I'm giving it full 2 out of 2 points for personal taste and preference. My biggest argument is just that I feel so smiley and happy when I watch it. And so I guess that's what this whole category is about, right? I dream watching Kara Lindsay play Catherine Plummer / Pulitzer has given me a small dream to play Catherine in a production of Newsies at some point in my life. Like, it just seemed her portrayal of Catherine and how wonderful she made that character. I just admire it so much, and I admire her performance of Catherine so much that like I just look up to that as like, you know, a career goal. But that aside, like, Newsies really just brings me a lot of joy, and so that's why I love it so much and why I continue to consume it. So again, I don't have a lot to say. I don't want to just keep repeating myself, but that's why I gave it full 2 points, because I just really cannot watch Newsies and not feel a bit of happiness.
All right, last category, as always, is creativity. For theater, it's a total possible score of 1 point. I kind of went back and forth on this, and I ended up giving it full points for creativity. One of the reasons I kind of went back and forth, I was like, is this really creative? I mean, it's really just kind of a straightforward musical theater show. But that's becoming so less common in modern musical context. So when did this premiere on Broadway?
2012.
Okay. For some reason, I looked it up, I thought it was 2011.
It workshopped in 2011, but it was officially opened in Broadway. I think it was March or May. Let me look.
Of 2012.
March of 2012.
2012.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So 2012, at this point, that's 10 years old, but
oof.
I know, right? Ouch. But it's a classic theater show. It feels like, I mean, I genuinely think that Newsies is the kind of show that is just timeless. It can be seen again in any time frame, and it's not going to feel dated. It's not going to feel overdone or overplayed. It's just really a timeless classic of a musical. For one that came out in 2012 is pretty admirable. That a musical that is probably going to stand the test of time feels so classic, if you will, even though it came out within the past, 15 years. Mm-hmm. That's just not very common, even though it isn't on Broadway anymore. I also feel like it was really wow. I also feel like it was really this perfect storm, because the Newsies film, which again I have not seen, was not very successful. And then it was rewritten and kind of revitalized on Broadway. And it really is kind of the perfect story for Broadway. Again, like I kind of said, it's a New York setting musical in New York. Of course, it's going to have better odds of doing well on Broadway than it would be in a mass-produced film. But I think overall, the real creative aspect is that this is a story that is really not well told. The Newsboys Strike of 1899 is not a very well told story. It is a historical event that happened with real, kids that really did a lot of what's kind of creatively expressed in this show. And then the fact that this is a musical with an all-male cast with this extensive and complex dancing and choreography is really not matched in the theater medium. We
True.
see a lot of theater productions with a lot of female cast because in general,
I feel like theater is probably majority women, at least maybe not Broadway, but like anything off Broadway probably has a higher percentage of females.
yeah, especially in like Tori and I see a lot of our local theater productions in
Lots of women.
the area, and there's a lot of women in the cast and in the
they're
ensemble.
great, don't get me wrong, but just like it sometimes it feels unbalanced.
Right.
Like,
I think less professional productions would have a hard time producing Newsies and finding that many
men.
males
Yeah.
to actually fill the roles of the cast. And so the fact that the dance and the vocals as well are so impressive amongst this all-male ensemble, and the fact that the ensemble outshines the main cast. The individuals in the show that do these really complex jumps and turns and flips and the tapping part of the tap dance, that's, you know, the most difficult, everything that's the highest difficulty level is done by an ensemble member. Mm-hmm. It's not done by a main cast or a principal cast member. So I think that alone is just not as common in theater, and I think that it should be commended for that. So 1 out of 1 for creativity from me.
okay, and I'll wrap it up here. So for creativity, I gave it 0.5 point out of 1. Let me explain. I think this show does a great delivery of what is in reality a very harsh topic, and that was the mistreatment and overworking of children in America in this period of time. Like Catherine says, you know, for every child in every factory, sweatshop, and meat house, or whatever she says, it wasn't just about the Newsies. This was about, you know, a very real problem at the time. And it could be a very heavy feeling show. It could be a very somber, dreadful kind of vibe, but they really give all of that weight without any of the grief. And I think that for a Broadway show, that's the exact balance that you need. So I think in that way, they did something really wonderful with their topic. Now, the reason I didn't give it a full point is because a good number of this was taken from the 1992 movie. So it technically wasn't the original concept. It was an improved concept and executes it, you know, much, 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 much better. But I think that because it wasn't the first of its kind technically, I didn't feel right giving it a full point for creativity. So the source obviously came from, you know, the real events, and those are a very interesting thing, I think, to write a story about. But since this is technically the second iteration of that, they already had the bones, if you will, and they just kind of rebuilt everything around that. So 0.5 point for creativity. So what does that make your overall score?
So my total score for Newsies is 9 out of 10.
Mine as well. This is the first time we've ever had a matching score, I think.
Is it?
I think so.
I don't know.
I don't think we've ever had a matching score. I'll have to go back and check.
Yeah, we'll have to check.
I don't think we've ever had a matching score. Maybe I'm forgetting. But 9 out of 10 for me as well.
Yeah, well, there we go.
All right.
But that wasn't really a surprise for you, I'm
No?
sure. I thought you were going to... I'm surprised you didn't give it a 10 out of 10.
No, I've only given one 10 out of 10 so far.
Yeah. I don't think I've given a 10 out of 10 at all.
You have not. Okay, you ready for lightning round?
Yes, I'm ready for lightning round.
Okay. Favorite song?
You're coming out of the gate with a really hard question. It kind of goes back and forth, but I think I would say The World Will Know. I think that one's probably my favorite number.
For me, it's either Watch What Happens or Carrying the Banner.
Well, you got to pick one.
Okay, Watch What Happens.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, question 2. Act 1 or Act 2?
Probably Act 1.
I think I would say the same. Not that I dislike Act 2, but there's a lot more fun, I think, in Act 1.
I think I like more of the musical numbers in Act 1.
Me too. Okay, favorite character?
I'm going to be basic. I would say Jack.
Okay.
That's my favorite character.
I would say Catherine.
Yeah.
Okay, question 4. Who would you rather get in a fist fight with?
Oh, gosh. Against? Like, I'm against this person?
Against. Okay. Jack Kelly, Spot Conlon, or Miss Meta?
Miss Meta. I think I could take her.
I don't think I could take Miss Meta. She's got some moxie.
I don't know. I mean, I would probably lose to all 3 of those, but I feel like my odds would be better against Miss Meta. So
Okay.
I think I would. Although, I don't know, because Jack Kelly says that he wouldn't hit Catherine because she's a girl. So maybe I could win a fight against him because he has more of like a moral compass that he wouldn't fight against, you know. Or Miss Meta, I could win against her because her outfits look pretty cumbersome. So maybe she couldn't fight as well.
Yeah, true. So I think I would actually say Spot Conlon, and my reasoning is this. We're about the same height.
Yeah, but that dude is huge.
That's true. He is very jacked.
He is huge.
But I feel like when you're shorter than your opponent, you could have a big disadvantage.
Yeah, but you're shorter than like everybody. So.
Except Spot Conlon.
Yeah.
He's just much larger in the arms than me.
That's very true.
Okay, question 5.
Yeah.
Least favorite scene.
I think we already covered
Should we
this.
say it together?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Something to believe in.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Favorite outfit or costume?
Ooh, that is a good question.
You can have multiples. I will allow multiples.
I think I would probably say Catherine's outfit at the end. Like with she's got kind of the striped blouse.
It's like the candy stripe.
Yeah. Which, I don't know, is that the same outfit in Watch What Happens? I feel like it's really similar.
It's similar, but I don't think it's the same.
I feel like she has the best outfits.
She's great outfits.
She has the best outfits.
Catherine has some great outfits.
Yeah. So I would either that. Let me Google it.
Okay, Google it.
Let me Google it. Yeah. No, I think I like the outfit she wears better towards the end.
Okay.
Of the show. I think I also like, the kind of magenta colored vest that she has. Like that looks really cute too. I really like that. I mean, all the Newsies costumes are excellent. I love how they each have their own little taste, like their own little flavor. But they're also kind of like basic male 1900s outfits.
Yeah.
So I think Catherine has the best outfits in the show, really.
I agree with you, but I also want to give an honorable mention. The lady that is Pulitzer's secretary, I love her outfit.
Yes.
It's like the little black vest, and it cinches her tiny little waist, and then it has she's like the long A-line skirt with she's got the circle wire rim glasses. Her whole getup is really nice.
And it fits her character so well.
It does.
Yeah.
So I really like her outfit.
I also like the outfit of, I can't remember his name, but the character that helps use the printing press. Oh. Who's also at the beginning.
Yeah.
Crud,
what is his name? It's like Mac or something. Printing press boy.
He's the son of the guy that owns the world. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, also, this just in. Newsies is in London. It's on stage in London.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So it 28th of November 2022 at the Troubadour Wembley Park Theatre.
All right.
So we might
if anybody's in London.
Yeah. We might have to take a little trip.
Okay, let's
go watch it. Yeah, with all of our extra money we just have lying around.
Yeah. All of the oodles of cash falling out of our pockets.
Right, exactly. If you want to make a donation.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back. Make sure you're following our social medias. We want to engage with you there. So we'll post teasers about each week's episode. Vote on what you think is coming. It's really fun for us to see people guess what the upcoming episode's about. So we have Twitter at Lion and Mouse Pod and Instagram at Lion and Mouse Podcast. Our website is lionandmousepodcast.com. On our website, our rules of engagement notes from each episode are there, so you can always be checking those. We have a suggestion box. Please tell us what you want to review next. Sometimes our brains get tired and we cannot figure out what we want to review next, or we're undecisive. So if you tell us what to review, it makes it a lot easier. So please do that. Also, support us on Patreon. You can receive gifts and exclusive content for that additional support, and we would really, really appreciate it if you did that. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. That'll help kind of expand our reach in those ways as well. As always, please thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.